Hello, Manchester, and welcome to another edition of Girard at Large. I am your locked and loaded host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. As you know, you can find us online at girardatlarge.com, and you can find us on Facebook and X, also at Girard at Large, where we encourage you to like us and to follow us. Why? Because when we put stuff out into the ether, we put it out there first for you to know what is going on. Now, last week, as we get started here, I promised you there would be more articles coming out this week in follow-up to stories that we broke last week. But I have to tell you, while several of the articles are written, I am waiting for comments and other critical details. And some of the stories, quite frankly, changed on Tuesday night, and I've not had a chance to really address them. But more to come. It's been a busy time, and we'll get it done. However, we're going to touch base on follow-ups on a lot of those stories tonight, because after last week's show, seems we rattled a few cages. The school district actually responded to our right to know request regarding the contamination at the Beech St site, and I got like a 500-page document that I really don't know what to do with. But in reading the first 10 or so pages, it would seem that there is contamination at the Beech St site. I saw things like lead and arsenic and leaching into water and all kinds of stuff. So I'm looking for some help from someone with some expertise in that material so that I can actually write something, but I will be releasing that material. And so we got that coming. And the mayor finally coughed up the goods on the right to know request I filed about, his claims that the school district has already complied with the state law regarding the Students First Act and releasing certain budget information. Of course, he didn't have any information because the school district hadn't replied. But since our last show, I think it was the very next day on May 1st, the school district very quietly, without any announcement or fanfare, at least not that I've seen, they certainly didn't notify me. They actually put up some numbers and some graphs that were intended to comply with the state law. The problem is they, of course, did it differently than I'm told just about every other school district in the state did. And instead of providing the actual dollars spent in each budget, et cetera, they came up with graphs of inflation-adjusted dollars. Now, in their defense, inflation-adjusted dollars are required in the law, which says you have to make your best attempt to adjust your numbers for inflation. Well, there are multiple ways to do that, but the school district, in doing what it did not tell people what the base data they adjusted for inflation was and what inflation calculation they used. So I sent them an email asking about that, and lo and behold, let me see, I'll give them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 days later, I'm still waiting for them to reply with the metrics that they used. And so there is something on their website, and we were all gung-ho to publish it over the weekend. However, I looked at the numbers. I couldn't figure out where they took them from. I couldn't figure out how they adjusted them for inflation because they didn't say what dates they used. And the one date they did say they used to adjust for inflation was November of 25, not November 1st, not November 25th, not November 15th, not November 30th, but November of 25, and the date matters if you're trying to do a calculation. And I found that date to be rather interesting because they did not include the 25-26 school year, which of course you would include the inflation numbers for, if you were using them as November of 25. In their prior year budgetary stuff, I've been playing phone tag with Senator Keith Murphy, the author of the law that's in effect, to get his take on it, and so we're waiting for that. There were probably some other things. Oh, yes, we're going to talk about the tax cap. Kudos to Ed Sapienza, who had a huge night. But before we get into more, I have a breaking news item that I want to share with you. But first, it's time to do our pictures. Let's see, what pictures do you have? Oh, this picture came to us from James in Manchester. James, thanks for tuning in and thanks for sending the picture. If you recall, last week I said anybody who finds a picture with of a bus that has a passenger on it, please take it and send it to us. I'm not really sure where the passenger is. I can see the driver up front, but maybe it's behind that glare. But James sent that to me and said only one person riding on this bus, and then goes on to say out of 12 city buses I have passed, only one bus had a rider and 11 buses had 0 riders. This needs to be your next issue to talk about after the schools and budget. I asked him, how long did it take you to see those 12 buses? Was it all in one day? He responded, yes, I did that all in one day. What I did was drive lots of the routes to so I could see the buses, and I can tell you that some of the routes should be combined or gotten rid of altogether. There is not enough riders from what I can see, and that they are wasting so much money on the MTA the way they are in the schools. Today at 12:30 when I was, and then I got that, so I got that earlier in the week, and today at 12:30 when I was leaving the Walmart in Hooksett, there was another city bus that was in front of me, and the whole bus was totally empty, no riders on it. Just passed another city bus, Route 11, and there was only one person on this bus. And then outside of our palatial studios tonight, I took this picture. And I took it because you can't really see it. The windows are tinted, but right towards the front, there was one person sitting on that bus. The rest of it was completely empty. Did I send any other pictures? Oh, our homeless update. Yeah, this lady is an overachiever. This is Orange Street, just east of Elm. She's got 2 carriages, one under the blue tarp, and then up further toward the corner, she's got another 2. So this lady is on Orange Street with 4 carriages. We saw her going back and forth. I handed the camera to one of my kids in the car because I was taking them to school, and that was taken out the back window. So breaking news out of McLaughlin Middle School. Yet again, McLaughlin. Dear families, sends the principal to the parents. We wanted to make you aware of an incident that happened on campus today at McLaughlin. This afternoon, an unloaded weapon was found in a 5th grade student's backpack. The weapon was immediately confiscated and the student removed from school grounds. Out of an abundance of caution, the school did enter a stay in place for a brief time. So you've got a 10-year-old with an unloaded gun, which you confiscate, you take the kid out of school, and you still put the school into lockdown. Didn't say how long, didn't say why, other than out of an abundance of caution. I wonder what was done during that period of time. Remember, it says, you can always submit a concern via our school safety reporting form. Please note, each report submitted is taken seriously and is actively investigated. Student safety remains our highest priority, and we are committed to doing everything possible to ensure a safe learning environment. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out. Principal Kelly Williams. By the way, my inbox, thanks to another loyal listener, is loaded with stuff from McLaughlin Middle School. I am hoping to find time to get through it and let you all know what's happening at the one middle school we have in Manchester that was created to be a middle school because, you know, how the building is designed matters so much, and yet if it's not dead last in the standardized test scores, the statewide standardized test scores of the city's 4 middle schools, it's second to last, which is not saying much when you have 4. So the fun continues at McLaughlin Middle School. So as mentioned, I was working on an article, and then Tuesday night happened. What happened Tuesday night at the Board of Mayor and Aldermen? Just a memo to our friends on Facebook Live. You might at some point want to tap into the live stream here at manchestertv.org, because when I start the slideshow, you're going to miss it all. Okay, so Ed Sapienza happened. Ed was off the hook on Tuesday night. He, and the schools. Yeah, there's other information on the schools. They've refused to respond to follow-ups about what penalties the teacher and principal who soaked taxpayers for hundreds of thousands of dollars by illegally enrolling her children in the Manchester School District. Yeah, they're not responding to any of that. Back to Ed Sapienza. So Sapienza lowered the boom. Once again, Mayor Jay Rouet tried to avoid having a budget discussion, all while saying, oh, I'm happy to talk about the budget, but they just tabled the budget. Yeah, well, Sapienza, like most people watching, I think, kind of got lost in the items, because normally what happens is the mayor calls out the item number and reads it on the agenda. Well, we were all in item number 19, and he was going through the different things in item number 19, but the last thing he went through in item number 19 were the budget resolutions, which were a separate item. So a lot of people who were watching, including Ed Sapienza, were unaware that the things had just been tabled. So Ed piped up and he's like, hey, well, I wanted to say something about item number 20. And they go, oh, well, I'm happy to talk about the budget, but it's tabled. And ultimately, the motion to table was withdrawn by Alderman O'Neill as a courtesy. Bryce Caou, very interestingly, tried to oppose that. And later on in the meeting, he's like, well, if Alderman, Sapienza wants to talk about this budget stuff, would he technically have to take it off the table first, even if he brought it up in new business? Oh, yes, he would. Oh, so Caou seems to be the foil now for Ed Sapienza, which is going to be fun to watch. Anyway, so Ed makes the motion to adopt the school budget as proposed by the mayor, seconded by Alderman Chrissy Cantor. Now, this is important because you have people like Mayor Jay Rouet, who made this eloquent speech about how our suffering taxpayers really need the city to make hard decisions because they can't afford to have a big tax increase. And certain people like Cindy Stewart have begged the board to be unlike the multiple communities and school districts around our state who have shot down budget increases at their town meetings. Yeah, no, we have to show people that we're willing to spend money when people are completely overwhelmed by the cost of living. We want to jack up their taxes. And the mayor is like, nope, 3%, we're going to hold the line on the tax cap, blah, 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 blah. Well, one way to do that is to approve the school budget, because the school budget, although they're cooking the books, as I've discussed with you about using tax revenues that the city does not collect, is not responsible for, does not assess, does not appropriate, using those tax revenues to pad their number. But anyway, so that motion went around the horn, and you'll never guess, it failed on a vote of, 10 to 2, 11 to 2, 11 to 2. June Trisciani was absent, and only Sapienza and Cantor voted to adopt the tax cap compliant school budget. That tells you the fix is in the works, and I'm curious how people like Ross Terrio of Ward 7, who has always made the tax cap one of his cornerstones, despite his, well, I'll just leave it there. He voted, so it looks like the ground is being set to, the ground is being set to override the tax cap. Now, otherwise, there'd be no reason to not adopt the school budget, which from time to time has been adopted before the rest of the city budget. That happened 2 years ago so that the schools can get busy about the business of hiring all those quality teachers that we have in the city of Manchester. And so we have that on the horizon. And later on in the discussion, Sapienza brought up two things that are very important. He really kicked in hard on the dialogue about whether or not the tax cap applies to the county tax and the statewide property tax. And the funny thing is that the city finance director, Sharon Wickens, said that, right after the mayor said, well, the city The tax cap says all. In our interpretation, all taxes, all means all taxes, means we assess the tax cap on the county tax and the statewide property tax because those are all taxes. And the finance director said, yeah, all taxes, quote, raised by the city, close quote. Well, the statewide property tax is not raised by the city. So if your interpretation is that all means all and all is all taxes raised by the city, why are you using the statewide property tax in your calculation? Because it's not raised by the city, it's raised by the state. It's merely collected by the city. We are a collection agency. Same with the county. We have nothing to do with the county tax rate. We have nothing to do with the county tax assessment. The county tells the city of Manchester how much money it owes, and the city of Manchester is obligated to collect that and hand it over to the county. So you have the statewide property tax and you have the county tax, neither of which is under the control of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, neither of which is appropriated by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, neither of which is set by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. It's collected by the city, and in the case of the statewide property tax for education, it's retained by the city. And in the case of the county tax, it's paid by the city to the county. But the Board of Mayor and Aldermen don't actually set those taxes. They don't actually appropriate those taxes. So why is it being used in the tax cap calculation? It makes a difference because this year it added those two taxes add $1.2 million to the amount that the city is saying can be collected under the tax cap. That $1.2 million is about 12 cents on your tax rate. That's a lot of dough. That's a lot of dough. And apparently this is the way it's always been done. Well, that means y'all been soaked, or we all have been soaked, for taxes that have nothing to do with the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, because the Board of Mayor and Aldermen doesn't determine them, doesn't appropriate them. So after that, Ed moved on and asked in his out loud voice, and this was rather entertaining, he asked in his out loud voice whether or not the people working on the budget were going to use anticipated revenues from the tax revaluation that is currently ongoing for the budget. And the mayor said, well, you know, I know a lot of aldermen are working on it. I've had some conversations with them. We're not going to give you a date certain, but everyone's working really hard to come up with priorities. And then for whatever reason, he recognized Alderman Burkish, and Burkish seemed actually pretty irritated with Sapienza. He's like, I already told you we're going to be using the revaluation in our budget. He said, I sent it to you in writing. You asked me and I sent you an email. So I've been telling you on this show that they are going to use the reval to soak you in the coming budget. They're going to use the reval to hide their tax increase, and they're going to use the reval to blame your increased taxes, not on their exceeding the tax cap, but on the increase in the value of your property. So that being the case, I put together a slideshow. And this is where those of you on Facebook Live, if you are watching, want to click into the stream or watch it on your TV, channel 8 on your Comcast dial, because we are going to go through, and folks, I've made this as interesting as I can, as simple and straightforward as I know how. So we're going to go through what happens in a reval, and then we're going to apply the tax cap to that reval so you understand where the real liability is, how it works, and my hope is that in teaching this to you, you will not fall victim to the lies of the politicians who are already not only ceding the ground to do this, but now publicly admitting, thanks to the audacity of Ed Sapienza, have admitted that, yes, they are looking to skim revaluation revenue increases to fund the city budget. So with that, let's hit the first slide. Revaluation explained. Why? Because they're going to lie about it to raise taxes. So, what you need to understand about how your tax rate is set is it starts with the tax base, and there's a basic formula, okay? Base value times rate equals revenue. Base value times rate equals revenue. So, let's say the tax base is worth $1 billion. To raise $10 million in tax revenue, the tax rate would have to be $10 per thousand of value. Formula, base times rate equals revenue, $1 million times 10 divided by 1,000, also known as 0.010, equals $10 million. Okay? Next slide. Revaluation changes the tax base. And if you don't raise taxes, this is a mathematical equation. There's a direct and inverse relationship between the tax base and the tax rate. If you don't raise taxes, the tax rate must fall by the same percentage the tax base increases by. So let's say the revaluation doubles the tax base. Instead of being worth $1 billion, it's now worth $2 billion. To raise $10 million in taxes, the tax rate must fall by half to $5 per thousand. If base times rate equals revenue, then $2 billion base times $5 per thousand is $10 million. Okay, got that? Next slide. Here's what the politicians will tell you. The rate will go down, but by a lesser percentage than the base goes up. So, let's take a look. We have the new tax base at $2 billion. Instead of raising $10 million in taxes, let's say the Board of Mayor and Aldermen want to raise $15 million. Let's go back to our formula. Base times rate equals revenue. $2 billion times what equals $15 million. Basic algebra here. You got to solve for x. X equals 15 million divided by 2 billion, which equals $7.50 per thousand. So the politicians will tell you that despite the fact that they raised $5 million more in taxes, your tax rate fell from $10 to $7.50, thus cutting your taxes by 25%, because the rate is what people see. They don't see the raw dollar amount raised in taxes. So they'll tell you that your tax rate went down, but they'll also tell you that because your value went up, that's why you're paying more in taxes. It has nothing to do with the fact that they're raising more in taxes. You see, the tax rate went down. No, keep that up. So next slide. Okay, but here's the reality. Because the amount of taxes increased, so did the rate. Remember the formula. Base times rate equals revenue. 1 billion, our original base, times $10 per thousand equals $10 million in revenue. $10 million equals $2 billion in tax base times $5 over 1,000. But now if you want to raise $15 million and you have a $2 billion base, that's a $7.50 per thousand tax rate. So taxes went up actually from $5 per thousand to $7.50 per thousand. That's an increase in our example of 50%. Why? Because the amount of taxes went from 10 million to 15 million, which is an increase of 50%. Next slide. You will get whammied in the revaluation. If your property goes up by the same percentage as the tax base, let's say your house is worth $100,000 before the revaluation. The tax rate is $10 per thousand. Home value times rate equals tax bill. It's just like base versus rate equals taxes. Home value times rate equals your personal tax bill. $100,000 times $10 per thousand is $1,000. After the revaluation, your house is worth $200,000. So remember, if the base doubles and you raise the same amount in taxes, then the rate falls by 50%, right? At $5 per thousand, your taxes would stay at $1,000. But if your taxes go up to $7.50 because they raised more in taxes, your taxes will jump from $1,000 to $1,500. Your taxes will go up by 50%. Okay, 200,000 times 7.5 divided by 1,000 equals $1,500. Next slide. So that's what will happen to you if your property goes up by the same value as the tax base. Because here's the thing, in a revaluation, and I'm going to show you this, but I want to explain it first. In a revaluation, the old saying goes, a third of the people will see their taxes go up, a third of the people will see their taxes stay about the same, and a third of the people will see their taxes go down. Why? Because when you do a revaluation, the overall value of the base will go up by a certain percentage. If your individual property goes up by more than the overall value of the base, you will pay more in taxes because relative to the base, your property is worth more money, and so you'll see a shift of the tax burden in your direction. For those who go up by less, you'll see a shift away from you in the tax burden because your property is worth proportionally less versus the overall base. Now let's go back to the slide. And that's important to remember because now what we're going to do is show you what happens if your property goes up to $300,000, right? So the overall tax base doubled. In the last slide, we showed the value of your home doubling, and we showed the value of the amount you paid in taxes staying the same if they don't increase the amount they collect in taxes. But we showed the value of your taxes increasing by 50% if they increase the amount collected in taxes by 50%. Now let's see what happens if your property goes to $300,000 in our example, right? So assuming they don't raise more in taxes, right? Value times rate equals tax bill. 100,000 times 100, times $10 per thousand is $1,000. 300,000 times $5 per thousand, right? Remember, the rate's got to come down by half if the value doubles. So now your tax bill is going to jump to $1,500. Okay? That's if they don't raise any more taxes because your property went up significantly more than the rest of the tax base. You tripled when the base doubled. Now, if they increase the amount coming at you in taxes, that $300,000 times $7.50, which is what we're using in our example, means your taxes go up to $2,250. The increase in your tax bill is 125%. Now, they will tell you that the rate fell by 25% and that your taxes went up because of the revaluation, which in part in this example is true. But it went up a whole lot more because they raised more in taxes. So you get double whammied. Remember that show when we were kids? Whammy, whammy, whammy! Yeah, you didn't want to get the whammy. Whammy was bad. Next slide. Now, if your property goes up by less than the tax base, you'll still pay more. So let's say your property goes from $100,000 to $150,000. Okay, at $100,000 you paid $1,000 in taxes at $10 per thousand. At $150,000, if they don't raise any more in taxes, the tax rate gets cut in half. Your tax bill falls to $750. But if they collect more in taxes overall, now you multiply that $150,000 that you have times the new tax rate, which in our example is $7.50 per thousand. Now your tax bill is $1,125. So your taxes would go down by 25% if they did not increase the amount of money collected in taxes. But your taxes go up 12.5% in our example because they actually raised more in taxes. So they will claim that they cut taxes and blame your tax increase on your increased value. Now in this case, your increased value left you with a smaller tax base because you went down by significantly less than the overall base. But it doesn't matter because their tax increase made your property tax bill go up even more. Next slide. So The tax cap, believe it or not, is actually designed to prevent this. They anticipated when they wrote the tax cap what would happen in a revaluation year. And before I get into this example, I want to explain something to you. You're going to hear them say that, well, we're going to do a revenue override, or also referred to as a soft override. Well, there's no such thing, because the tax cap does one thing. It limits the amount of new property taxes that can be raised from one year to the next to no more than the 3-year average of the Consumer Price Index. This year, that 3-year average is 3%. This year, regardless of what this means to the tax rate, the city, using their formula, which wrongly, in my opinion, uses $40 million in taxes that it does not control, does not appropriate, does not have any influence over, the statewide property tax and the county tax, okay? They can raise $8.1 million new dollars in taxes, okay? The tax cap goes on to say that if you lose non-property tax revenues, you have to offset those losses with the increase in taxes before you can increase spending. So let's just say revenues went down, non-tax revenues went down by $3 million. The tax cap says you can raise $8.1 million. Well, you really can only increase spending by $5.1 million because that $3 million loss in revenues has to be offset, has to be paid for by the increase in taxes, okay? This is how the tax cap works. So in years past, people have said, oh, we'll do a revenue override. We've got a revaluation, or we had a bunch of, we had a great year in construction, and so the value of the tax base is going up. So we want a revenue override. We don't want to raise your tax rate. No, we don't want to do that. We just want to collect the extra money that we can collect from the increase in the value of the tax base. Well, if you didn't increase taxes by that added value, then that added value, then that revenue would be put against would be left on the tax rate at the time it's set by the Department of Revenue Administration, and your tax rate would go down. There was, I believe it was in 2014, 15 maybe? I forget the exact year. But Mayor Ted Gatsas and every alderman and every school board member campaigned for an amendment to the city charter that would have allowed that very thing to happen, would have allowed new revenue from increases in the tax base to be used under the tax cap. And the voters didn't just defeat it, they set it on fire, stomped it, tossed it over the ledge, which you can no longer jump off of into the water below, and said, no, not doing it, So let's go see what the tax cap now says about revaluations. It's a specific section in the charter. It's section 6.154C. Budget limitation in revaluation year. When there is a citywide revaluation, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen shall adhere to the following limitations for a positive or negative revaluation. Meaning it doesn't matter if the value of the tax base goes up or the value of the tax base goes down. Here's what you get to do. Property tax revenues raised in the prior fiscal year, excluding property tax revenues raised for amounts payable in connection with the municipal bond obligations for the prior fiscal year, shall not be increased by a factor more than the average of the changes in the National Consumer Price Index, urban, as published by the United States Department of Labor for the 3 calendar years immediately preceding budget adoption. Then this figure shall be used in establishing the new municipal budget. What does that mean? Prior year taxes times 3 years average of the CPI equals new collection taxes allowed. So in our example, where we're collecting $10 million in taxes times 3%, that means you can increase taxes by no more than $300,000. And it doesn't matter what the tax rate does or what that $300,000 does to the tax rate. You know, if this was like years past, like in the 1990s, where we really had budget challenges that weren't born of crazy spending because we had a cratering economy, we had the savings and loan crisis, we had the 5 largest banks, all headquartered in downtown Manchester, shut down in a day, and we lost 30 to 40% of the value of the tax base because the savings and loan people, FDIC, we didn't call them FDIC for nothing, were selling things at 30 cents on the dollar, and they were completely irrational. It cratered the tax base. It was crippling for the city. So the tax base can go up, the tax base can go down. The amount of money collected in new taxes is what the cap governs. Period, full stop. So when they tell you, oh, it's all about the tax rate, they're either stupid or lying, and they're probably both, because if you're lying, you've got to be stupid. So in our example, you can increase taxes by 3%. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is what this means. Well, how the cap protects you in a revaluation, because it limits the amount of new taxes that can be raised on the amount of taxes collected, not the rate. Value times rate equals tax bill. Your house is worth $100,000 times $10 per thousand, that's $1,000. If you can increase the taxes collected, not the tax rate, if you can increase the taxes collected by 3%, in our example, your taxes, irregardless of the revaluation, can go up by $30. Now, we gave you several examples. $150,000, if you multiply that, okay, remember the tax base doubled, so the tax rate gets cut in half. $150,000 times $5 per thousand means your taxes are $750. Now, if you're going to follow the tax cap, you would multiply that $750 by 3%, that's $22.50. Your tax bill would go up after the reval, or actually your tax bill would go down after the reval to $772.50. Okay? It would go down $250 because of the revaluation, but it would go up $22.50 because of the tax cap, what was allowed under the tax cap. Now, if your property was worth $200,000, you're paying $1,000 in taxes at $5 per thousand. At 3%, 3% of $1,000 is $30. Your tax bill will go to $1,030. If you're, I don't know what the right way, if you're lucky, I guess, because luck can be good or bad, your property goes under the revaluation to $300,000. The property tax rate falls by half because the overall base doubled. You're paying $1,500 in taxes. So you're going to get kicked in the teeth because of the revaluation. Now, if the tax cap holds, in addition to the $500 increase you will suffer because of the revaluation, you will experience another $45 increase because of what's allowed under the tax cap, and your total bill will go to $1,545. Okay? Now, next slide. Okay? The tax cap doesn't control the rate. It's a deception designed by people who want to break the cap. The tax cap says you can increase the amount of property tax revenue raised in the prior year by the 3-year average of the National Consumer Price Index urban. So in our example, the prior year taxes collected were $10 million, the cap is 3%, $10 million times 3% is $300,000. In real life, This year's 3% cap equals $8.1 million in new tax revenue. That means anything over $8.1 million in new tax revenue requires an override vote of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, regardless of the tax base. Regardless of the tax base. Regardless of the tax base. So here's what Jim Burkish and crew are going to do. Okay? So the mayor has already said, well, you know, there were expenses that I didn't have before I released my budget, which frankly is a sign that he's not in control of the process and is not all that concerned with it. And one of them is $1.5 million for health insurance. How do you not have your health insurance costs before you go and present your budget? Was that a problem last year? Was that a problem the year before? Was that a problem the year before? I've done budgets in this town, folks. That I can't wrap my head around that. That just blows my mind. The schools come out with their budget at least a month before the mayor does because they've got to present it, they've got to have a public hearing, they've got to send it to the mayor, blah, blah, blah. They had their numbers. Why didn't the mayor? Then he babbled something about revenues, and he alluded to other expenses that they were unaware of. And I'm thinking it probably has something to do with what's called the abatement account, because there will be abatements that they have to budget for during the revaluation. And then you've got the schools screaming bloody murder. Now, if you saw the last meeting of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, and I will probably try to get a clip of it and put it up at girardatlarge.com. But the last two meetings, I have shared some pretty damning information about spending on the city schools. Do you know that since the tax cap was enacted for fiscal year 2012, that spending in the City of Manchester schools has gone up by $88 million, a nearly 60% increase in spending, while student population has cratered, down 25%, down 36 or 3,800. I don't know. It was in my 3-minute presentation. Okay, and that, folks, doesn't count the nearly $90 million that they got from the feds for COVID relief money, the so-called ESSER funds, ESSR. Okay, so that money came in fiscals, I believe, 22, 23, and 24. $90 million. So really, and not counting any other federal funds, which over that same 3-year period of time totaled another $75 million. Okay, so if you just take what was appropriated, it went from $150 million to $238.5 million. There were 6 tax cap overrides in 11 years, all of them with the stated purpose of increasing spending on the schools. One of the years, 2016, I believe it was, where there wasn't a tax cap override, Mayor Gatzis took every penny allowed both the city and the schools under the tax cap, and he spent it on the schools, which doubled the spending increase that they were allowed under the tax cap. Okay, and that happened in other years too, such that certain aldermen, including Keith Hirschman, got very angry with the mayor for doing that. It's one of the reasons why they supported one of the profligate police contracts that they did, because they wanted to force Gatzis to have to spend money on the city side because they were tired of giving it all to the schools. True story. Nick Pappas was on the board. Who's Nick Pappas advising now? Oh, that's right. He was the mayor's chief of staff, and before that and after that, he was the mayor's campaign manager. He was the alderman from Ward 6 when that vote went down. So, not counting what roughly averages $20 to $25 million a year over a 13, 14-year period of time. Oh, and one of those, fiscal 20, by the way. Fiscal 20 saw a $6.6 million increase in spending over the cap over the amount allowed by the cap just for schools in that 1 year. So you've seen an $88 million increase in school spending, a 60% increase in school spending despite a 25% decrease in student population since the tax cap went into effect. You've seen a $90 million in funds hit the school district over 3 years to recover from COVID. And we all know how they pissed that money away, right? Increasing operational expenses, not the least of which they did. You've seen them use, over a period of 3 years, $21 million in emergency money from their trust funds, their expendable trust funds, as revenue, specifically with the purpose of avoiding cuts that otherwise would have been required under the tax cap. And now they say, because Jay Rouet, for all of the spending that he gave them over his first 2 years as mayor, $11.5 million during a period of time where you saw, I think, 200 or 300 fewer kids come to the schools. Because they didn't max out the cap, now, if they don't get $16 more million from where they are today, 238 to 200 and, $54 million? The whole thing's going to fall apart. And they say that it will just bring them to where they should have been if they had gotten their tax cap compliant budgets in the prior years. Of course, they lie about the cap because, why? They pad the numbers. They say their budgets were tax cap compliant, but they were stealing money from emergency reserves, making pretend that they were revenues so they could increase their spending. They already told you if you lose revenue, you have to offset it with the increases in taxes before you can increase spending. So, since the last tax cap override, the budget's gone from $187 million, that was in fiscal 23, by the way, the last tax cap override. The budget's gone from $187 million to $238 million. It's $51 million bucks. And it's not enough. They want another $16 million. Ideally, they want to get not to $254 million, but to $265 million. Man, if we get to $265 million, we'll be cooking with gas. Holy cow. So they talk about their tax cap compliant budgets, but they've cooked the books with the willing assistance of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, who either thought I was making it up because, folks, you say a lot of things about me, but not that I make stuff up. Not that I don't know the numbers. Not that I don't know how this thing works. You don't always have to agree with my conclusions, but, because different people can draw different conclusions from the same set of facts. But you can't dispute the facts. Not to mention the fact that some of those expendable trust expenditures, if you actually read the trusts, were not allowed because they weren't properly authorized by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And this year, their budget had $4.5 million in approved expenditures from the trust as revenue, but they actually took another $3.8 million after their budget was approved, which they can't do. It's a violation of the trust agreement. It's a violation of city ordinance. Nobody cares. So here's the thing. The schools have really, and they only talk about the money that gets appropriated. They don't talk about the annual $25 million a year or so that we get from title funds. They don't talk about other grants that they get from the community, from various, organizations. They never talk about any of that, okay? They run around and talk about how great it is they got these grants, $10 million grant for the next 3 years to help kids be college and career ready. They never count that in any of their per pupil spending. They never count that in any of the work that they're doing. No, they only focus on the actual appropriation. Jim O'Connell runs around and Cindy, his little parrot, his little puppet parrot, Cindy Stewart. Oh yeah, oh, the amount, the tax rate for the schools actually went down because you guys are cheap. No, it went down because you get $12 million more in state aid. That's why it went down. Oh, and by the way, you took another $9 million out of your expendable trusts. Why? To avoid a $9 million cut that you should have had under the tax cap. Although it probably wouldn't have been that. I have to go back and take a look at the numbers. Why? Because they got a $12 million increase in state aid. If anyone wants to chime in, the number is 698. I got to put my glasses back on. 3233, is that right? 698-3233. So this is what's at play. And Ed Sapienza has, kudos to him for staying on it and forcing the discussions. Because, folks, I will be perfectly honest with you. I did not realize until I think it was 2 years ago that the schools were actually including the statewide property tax in their tax cap calculation. And I think I figured it out because I think it was the way they presented it on one of their standard budget presentations. And it said state and local tax or something like that. That made me go, what? So instead of calculating their tax cap on the $100 million that come from local property taxpayers, they're calculating it on $120 million because $20 million comes from the statewide property tax. Similarly, on the city side, I had no clue that they were using the county assessment, the county tax, to calculate the tax rate. That's just wrong. The city does not include that. The city has no role in the county tax and has no role in the statewide property tax, except to collect them and hand them over to the schools and hand them over to the county. The Board of Mayor and Aldermen doesn't determine those taxes. The Board of Mayor and Aldermen, that tax rate is not determined by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. That appropriation is not made by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. It shouldn't be done. Now, they also don't do things that they should do. And you heard part of it when we went through it about, because there are certain things that are exempt from the cap. Debt service is one of them, capital expenditures, things like that, where there's a statutory obligation for the city to pay. That's actually not, that has to be backed out of the tax cap calculation. And that is to the favor of people who want to spend more money, frankly. Okay? But along the way, the people have become lazy. It's just easier to make it about the rate. Now with the revaluation coming, and this happened, and you might recall, Joyce Craig was the mayor. It was the fiscal 22 budget, I believe. Okay, and there was my tax bill went up 25%. In part because my property went up by more than the value of the overall tax base, but because the city used the reval as cover to increase the amount raised in taxes significantly. Okay, what I showed you in these slides is what happened. Some of it came from the revaluation, but a big chunk of it came because the city, instead of holding to the cap, significantly overrode it. So let's take a look at the liabilities. Right now, the police department, and Jay Ruway's already thrown the marker out there saying, oh yeah, well, essentially he said, we're gonna have to give them pay raises that are gonna break the cap because, we have problems with, attracting and retaining officers. There's a fellow named Austin Bouchard who gave a brilliant presentation at the last meeting of the board. He did some research on the vacancies over the last, I think, 5 to 7 years. And for all of the extra money that we have added to the police department budget, for all of the enormous pay raises that police have gotten, for all of the extra detail goodies that we give away, millions and millions of dollars on top of what's in the budget, okay? There's been a net increase in the number of police officers of 10, okay? Now, I said to you not too long ago, why is the mayor adding $1 million to police budget because there are officers coming off of grants that we need to pay for, when at the time there were 24 vacancies, and there was a history of there not being any fewer than 20 vacancies over the prior 3 years? Why are you doing it? Why do you need $1 million to retain 10 people when you have 24 vacancies? If you don't put that $1 million in, you have enough money to fund 14 vacancies, and since you haven't had any fewer than 20 vacancies, it seems a pretty safe bet. But he's already said, well, no, we got to attract and retain our police officers, so you know they're going to come up with a series of pay and benefits that are going to completely obliterate the cap. That number is not in that budget that he presented. Now you have $1.5 million that is health insurance. Oh, we got to take care of the health insurance, and that doesn't count whatever they're going to give the cops, okay? Every department is screaming about something, so you know the numbers are going to go up. And then there are the schools, who aren't going to be satisfied with anything less than $16 million. And you just had 12 aldermen vote, 11, Trishiana would have voted, you just had 12 of them vote against Sapienza and Cantor's move to adopt the tax cap compliant budget of the schools as presented by the mayor, which would, oh, heartbreak, it would bring them from $238 to $235 million. And just 3 years ago, they were at $191 million. The shame of it all. So they've already, with where the budget is now, they've already maxed out what they can do under the tax cap. They're already at $8.1 million. Every dollar they add to the budget is going to be added to that $8.1 million, unless you start calling your aldermen and showing up at meetings and saying, oh, hell no. If you think you got whacked in the last reval, and a lot of us did, wait till you get whacked in this one, because the shift from commercial and retail continues to move towards housing, and just the overall value of the base because of the high cost of housing. And now, okay, you're probably looking, if I were going to guess, you're not looking at $8 million in new taxes. They're probably going to at least double that to 16, which means on top of it all, you're going to get hit with at least a 6% tax increase. Folks, there's only one way to stop that, and that's to make sure your aldermen and the rest of your neighbors know that it is unacceptable, and you show up at City Hall and you send the letters and you make the phone calls and you send the emails and you tell them, stay to the tax cap, because we're going to get crushed again anyway, so why rub salt in the wound? I am your ever humble host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, be good, be well. Don't do anything we wouldn't do. We're proud to have in the audience. Thanks so much for being there. We'll post this show up at girardatlarge.com so that you can watch it and go through the slides again at your leisure, or share it with family and friends. This is important stuff, and it could have dire financial consequences for thousands of people across our city. Until next week, be good.